So this will be my first.
Yes, I can hear
so I
you.
was saying
Please go
that
ahead.
I didn't attend the training, although I made all the necessary commitments and all that. So I'm wondering if this session is appropriate for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good one. You're here. Just to let you know that this is not like the training, like the training itself. Obviously, you need to do your training. I think most of the persons who are here have actually done their training. But then, I mean, it's a good thing you're here and we're able to understand, the fact that you have actually finished your registration, but then you're yet to take the class. So all you simply need to do is get in touch with us. We can I'll put you into any of our classes. I mean, we usually hold classes at the beginning of every month. So the weekend classes is starting next weekend, which is 5th of March. And then the weekday class is starting the following, week Monday. So depending on anyone you choose to attend. But like I mentioned earlier on, this is not like a core 35 hours training. This is basically to catch up on, previous participants, and then also be able to take questions and make clarifications where necessary. Okay, so I don't see any other hands up. I just want to presume that every other person has an understanding of what we're saying. And then, of course, basically we're on the same page. But just in case anybody has any clarification, I'll just give 1 minute to, persons who might want to ask questions. You could just go ahead and say something, just in case you don't know how to raise your hand. I mean, let's go ahead and say something and I will allow you to. So if I don't get any contribution, then I'll dive in straight and discuss the topic for today, which of course is going to be focusing on the Agile methodology. Again, it helps us bring you up to speed with regards to the recent development. And like I said, for some of us, it might also be a reminder or a refresher of some of the things that, we already know. All right, Gerald.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to find out something. I noticed that, like you mentioned earlier, there are 3 domains now.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So the process part, is this still the same process we know about? The processes that we know about, as in the old PMP guide and all that. Is it a new? Are we expecting something new as per the process part?
So a lot of things have actually changed. The thing is, before now, PMP was structured in such a way that it seemed like what you do from one step to the other. I mean, like you do initiating, you do planning, you do executing, and then you do monitoring and controlling, you do closing, which was quite relatable, and it made it easier for a whole lot of people. But then in practice, we know that things don't really work that way. So in practice, it's a lot more of iterations, back and forth, each process eating into another process and all of that. So I think that's what gave rise to the update. So the update is basically more or less to now align it with, what actually gets done, especially in real life, and update it with regards to what applies, especially in the field of project management. So it is a lot more difficult now to interpret for a whole lot of people because you now have a lot of information everywhere. So organizing it in such a way as to make sense most times, and then also be able to present it in a sequential manner like we used to have before to enable you, fully appreciate it and see maybe how it applies to project becomes, a bit more challenging. But of course, we have a way around that. So the point I'm trying to make is, before now, you used to know of those processes, but what I'm trying to point out at this stage is that it doesn't necessarily follow those processes any longer. So the thing you're now seeing there basically are just topics that now addresses what happens in each of these domains, like how you are able to manage people, the tasks that you perform in being able to manage people within your project. Here you talk about things like team building, you talk about things like team charter, you talk about things like motivation, and then of course processes. So here you now talk about most of the things that are now in the processes domain is now all of those processes that you used to know, but then not in the same structure any longer. So you now have it as, the various knowledge areas, and then some of the processes or tasks that are done within those knowledge areas. And then, of course, the business environment part, which now talks about things around compliance, government regulations, community relations, and all of that. So that's now essentially how the whole thing is structured, as against the sequential, steps or processes that we used to have before now. I think that's also one key thing you need to understand. And like I mentioned earlier on too, Agile has also become an integral part of all of this. All right, so thank you all so much for those questions. And I'll just jump in straight and discuss, like I mentioned earlier on, the topic for today, which basically just giving us an introduction to what the Agile project management methodology is, and then also helping us understand some of the practices that we do, especially within the Agile space. Again, I really like, interactive sessions. So just let me know anytime you have any question. All you just to do is raise up your hand. And since we're not, I don't think, since a lot of people who are part of these sessions are already participants or people who are taking trainings with us before, we are not going to have chaos if anybody unmutes and jumps in and says anything at any point in time. So let's just quickly talk about Agile. So I'm currently sharing my screen. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. It's actually a blank screen. So just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. So I just want to be sure that participants can see the screen. Can you see my screen? So I just wrote Agile at the top left.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay.
Agile, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for confirming that. So with regards to the Agile project management methodology, first of all, I'm going to be discussing what to refer to one as Agile artifacts. Then I'm going to be discussing Agile roles. And then I'm also going to be discussing Agile ceremonies. So these are the three things I hope to cover in this particular session. When we talk about Agile basically focuses on speed. So the idea of Agile methodology is to try as much as possible to be able to focus on implementation or execution, and then carry out our project as quickly as possible. That's what Agile focuses on. This is predicated on the fact that if you were focusing on traditional methodology or using traditional methodology for your project implementation, okay, I just want to be sure you are still there. Can you hear me? Because I lost connection briefly.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I was talking about the fact that in Agile project management methodology, that the idea is majorly focused on speed and then, of course, on execution. So within the Agile space, we have specific artifacts. Of course, those artifacts include what we call the product backlog. So there's what we call the product backlog. And then beyond the product backlog, we also have what we refer to as the sprint. And then aside from the sprint, we also have what we now refer to as our information radiators. So the product backlog is simply a list of all the features or functionalities that we hope to accomplish within a project itself. That's what a product backlog focuses on. Okay, so when we talk about the product backlog, let's say, for example, we're designing or we're developing an application, And that application is for, I mean, one of the most popular things that is going on now is cryptocurrency. So want to develop an application that will enable people trade and swap their cryptocurrencies. So part of the things we may have as features for that particular application might be that people should be able to make deposits. So they should be able to deposit money. People should be able to also withdraw from it. Then also people should be able to swap maybe from Bitcoin to Ethereum and the rest of them. And then people should be able to check their balances. And then also people should be able to, create a wallet within that particular application, and on and on and on. So all of these features is now what makes up our product backlog. So your product backlog is simply a list of features that you hope to accomplish within your project. That's what makes up your product backlog. And in Agile space, this list of features, we are going to now be calling them our user stories. So user stories basically refers to features or functionalities that we need to accomplish within the project itself. So like I mentioned earlier on, all of it together is what constitutes our product backlog. So within this product backlog, we now break it down into what we call sprints. So sprints basically refers to short durations. So in many cases, sprint is usually between 2 to 4 weeks. So what we're simply saying is that every 2 to 4 weeks, let's say we're running a 2-week sprint. So what we're simply saying is that at the end of every 2 weeks, we must have a working software or an increment. So in essence, simply means that by the end of the first 2 weeks, we're going to have an application with which people can actually trade on cryptocurrencies, which of course I'm using for this, my example. And then in subsequent weeks, we're not going to be having what we call increments. In other words, new features and functionalities will continuously be added to that particular software. So that's what we refer to as an increment. So the idea is this, that the application gets ready in the very first sprint, which is of course in the very first 2 weeks. And then instead of we waiting until all the features have been deployed before this application gets ready, we started by choosing maybe 1 or 2 based on what we call a minimum marketable feature, which basically refers to the most important feature that the market is clamoring for. And then based on that, we say, okay, let's deploy that in the very first 2 weeks. And then in subsequent weeks, we now begin to add the other features progressively up until we have been able to exhaust all the items that you have within your product backlog. So your sprint is basically short duration, at the end of which you must have a working software or an increment, as the case may be. So things need to be continuously being added to that particular software that you may have developed at the end of your first sprint. So in order to now clearly indicate information as to where we are at every point in time or every stage within our project, we now use information radiators to be able to do that. So I'm going to talk about information radiators quickly, but then let me take this particular question from Victory. Victory, please go ahead. Let me know if you have any questions or clarifications to make based on what I've explained so far.
Okay, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, hi, good morning. So I just wanted to ask, right, this product that's going to be available after this first 2 weeks, can we call it the minimum viable product or not yet?
Yes, so you can actually call it minimum viable product. You can call it minimum viable product. So your minimum viable product simply means that, I mean, with what we have achieved so far, we can actually begin to get an ROI or return on investment from it. That's why it's called minimum viable product. So you look at the key things that people are actually buying, or the key features that would actually make people use that particular product. And then you deploy that as soon as possible. So people begin to use it. You probably begin to generate some income from it. In fact, some persons actually base the funding for their project based on the returns they get from the minimum viable product, which is a risky thing to do. I usually don't advise that, okay? But the point I'm trying to make is, from your minimum viable product, you can actually begin to get some, level of returns on investment based on what you have done, especially if this is a commercial software or solution, as the case may be. Obviously, if it's an internal one, it might just be a process effectiveness or improvement solution, as the case may be. All right, so thank you for that. So just like I was mentioning, to be able to now showcase where we are at any point in time with regards to that particular project, we now use information radiators. So information radiators are basically things that we use to showcase information as per where we are within the project itself. I mean, simplest examples of information radiators are things you see at the airport. So you get to the airport, for example, you see a lot of notifications and then all of that. I mean, my first ever international, travel I made with all the countries I visited, I never got to the airport once and I was asking anybody, I want to do this, or please, where can I do this? Because at every airport, you notice that usually there's a lot of information being displayed and you can follow those information and be able to do, practically whatever you're doing and all of that. So that's the essence of the information radiators. So within the Agile space, the information radiators we use, of course, includes things like what we call your burn down chart. So your burn down chart shows the amount of work that is remaining to be done. So in essence, as we accomplish each of these items that we have within our product backlog, you will notice that gradually we're going to be burning down the features. So the number of features will be reducing. So that's what the burn down chart actually helps us to do. So the burn down chart basically showcases what has been done and then what is left to be done. Then there's now the burn up chart. In addition to the burn down chart, there's the burn up chart. So the burn up chart is showcases basically what has been accomplished. That's what the burn up chart shows. This is also very important, especially for the purpose of the exams, because there are usually questions that surround the burn down chart and the burn up chart. So while the burn down chart is showing what is left to be done, the burn up chart is showing what has been done. So you now see a case where the burn down chart will be going down, while the burn up chart will now be going up, as the case may be. And then there's now the Kanban board. So Kanban is basically using sticky notes because what usually happens is these user stories, you now put them in a 4x4 index card. So, and then of course, in many cases, you can place them within a burn down chart or rather a Kanban board. So a Kanban board might just have three major headings, which of course are maybe our to-do, then of course our in progress or work in progress, let me call it WIP, and then of course work done, as the case may be. So initially, all your product backlog would fall under the to-do. And then once you've put them under to do, at every sprint, you choose the ones you're working on. So let's say we select this and this. So we move them to our work in progress. And then the moment we finish any of it, we simply move the card to done. So by mere looking at the Kanban board, people can actually tell, oh, okay, these are the user stories that are still in progress. These are user stories that has been accomplished within the project itself. So these three are the major information radiators that majorly we use within the Agile space. Like I mentioned, there's a burn down chart, there's a burn up chart, and then also you have your Kanban boards, as the case may be. Mr. Gerald, please go ahead. I noticed you raised your hand at some point.
Okay. Yes. So I wanted to ask, you mentioned about when you were talking about the sprint, you mentioned that we were looking at the MVPs. I call them MVPs. That's most viable products. Yeah.
That's
okay.
correct.
Minimum viable product. Yeah. So I'm thinking, is it the same thing as prototype? Prototype.
No.
Okay.
So prototyping is different. Now, there are some persons who may choose to do a prototype. Of course, the essence of prototype is basically more like a miniature, so that all the errors you would have made, or all the time, or all the money you would have spent in doing the major thing and having issues there, you're able to figure it out during your prototype stage. That's the whole idea of the prototype. So depending on how you choose to go within that particular project, prototype may actually be a user story. So it might not be that one of the things we need to do first is to do a prototype. So that can be a user story. So you can say in the first sprint, we do a prototype. And then of course, depending on, again, the extent that we want to push the prototype, because some prototypes are actually pushed to a live environment. I remember Inbox by Google back then. I mean, they finished the prototype and they pushed it out to selected individuals. So, few persons try it, or they will say this is an invitation-based solution. So people keep trying it and then giving feedback. And then they now inculcate that feedback and then progressively work on it to now come up with the final product, as the case may be. So prototype is not necessarily an MVP, but then in many cases, prototypes are actually used in order to maybe prevent certain errors that may happen if we begin to do the live project or begin to do the live thing, as the case may be. So I hope that answers your question. So remember, I've talked about some of the agile artifacts, which of course included the product backlog, where I mentioned it contains all the items we need to deliver for that project. Then the sprint, which is usually a duration at the end of which we must have a working software or an increment added to our working software. I've also talked about information radiators. So now I'm going to talk about some roles that you have within the agile space. So there are three major roles within the agile space. There's the role of the product owner. So you have the role of the product owner. And then there's also the role of the Scrum Master. So there's the role of the Scrum Master. And then you now have the role of the developers. I'm using the word developers because I mean I just finished reading the updated version of the Scrum Guide, which of course is more like the document that governs Scrum implementation. The developers are usually, or before now, used to be called development team. PMI also refers to this third role as development team. So in your exam, you're most likely going to be seeing development team. But then I'm just trying to let you understand that this development team is same as the developers using the current, quoting the current version of the Scrum Guide, as the case may be. So these are the three roles that you have within an agile environment. So remember I said we have the role of the product owner, there's the role of the Scrum Master, and then there's now the role of the developer. So the product owner manages the product backlog. So remember I mentioned the product backlog. So all of those determining the minimum viable product or the minimum marketable feature or the features that will add most value to us as an organization, it is the product owner that does that. The product owner prioritizes all the user stories that you have within your your product backlog. So it's actually the product owner that determines which user stories we're going to be implementing within a given sprint. And that's the major function of the product owner. So the product owner has the vision for the product. The product owner manages the product backlog and then determines the minimum viable product and then also prioritizes items that you have within your product backlog. So those are the things that the product owner does. Then we have the role of the Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master is the servant leader. The Scrum Master is the person who ensures that if the team has any obstacle, limitations, the Scrum Master helps the team to be able to deal with that and then also to be able to overcome those predicaments or inhibitions that the team may likely have. So one of the major functions of the Scrum Master is the Scrum Master helps to remove impediments for the team. And then the Scrum Master also facilitates agile ceremonies. So all of those agile ceremonies that I've mentioned, or rather I'm going to talk about, it is the responsibility of the Scrum Master to actually facilitate those ceremonies and make sure that those ceremonies actually hold. Then we now have the role of the developer. So the developers are now those who are now responsible for doing the work itself. And usually it should be a cross-functional team. I mean, people from all walks of life. So your development team must be such that you will not need an external help. In other words, it has to be a self-sufficient, self-organizing team. So here you might have developers or people who write the lines of codes. You may have testers, those who test the codes as they are being written. You may have a quality assurance person, as the case may be. You may have a business analyst. I mean, all of these are, functions that can actually make up the role of the development team, or what we may refer to as the developers, as it were. So in all, your Agile team should not be more than 10. So all the people within your Agile team cannot or mandatorily must not be more than 10. So you may have maybe 8 developers and then 1 product owner or 1 Scrum Master. You may also have maybe a Scrum Master who is also a developer, So you have a product owner, then a scrum master, and then maybe other, team members. But by and large, both the role of the scrum master, the product owner, and the developers must at any point in time not exceed 10, especially for the exams. You also need to be aware of this because a lot of questions usually come up around these, roles, and then there are numbers that you may have within the examination itself. Okay, so of course, if anybody has any question, please do well to let me know. Otherwise, I go and talk about the very last part, which is now the Agile ceremonies. So talking about the Agile, is there any question? Does anybody want to ask any question or make any clarification?
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, it has to do with the Scrum Master. Can I call the Scrum Master the project manager as well? Because though project manager handles projects, this one handles products. Like he's a product, he's the one that's in charge of facilitating ceremonies, ensuring the team implements removes impediment for the team. And these are some of the things the project manager is used to do. I mean, in the project setup. That's my number one question. And then the number two question is, we're talking about products here, sort of projects here. Are they the same thing? I know that the product is one of it's like a deliverable for a project, kind of, yeah, a product or a service. So the question is now, because sometimes it's confusing. We're talking about products here is in the Agile. Is it the same thing as projects or something?
All right, so thank you so much. I mean, and that's why I'm excited holding this session, because especially people who have not done the recent version of the PMP, there's usually this confusion and they begin to make relationships with what they already know, which is fine, because I mean, that's part of the best ways you can learn. But please know that the Scrum Master is not a project manager. In fact, within an Agile space, there is no managerial position. So Agile should be a self-organizing team. We all agree on things and do things collectively. So that's why when I was talking about the role of the Scrum Master, I said, this is a servant leader. I mean, you know how it is said that the greatest amongst you shall be your servant. So the Scrum Master is majorly more like a servant. So what the project manager comes with a lot of authority. The project manager comes with a lot of responsibilities, power, managing things, giving directives, deciding on what to be done, tracking progress, giving instructions, receiving reports. That's usually, whom a project manager is. But the Agile Scrum Master doesn't do all of that. So the Scrum Master is basically, do you guys have any issues? Okay, if yes, how do we address it? And then runs around and, addresses that or make sure that that is taken care of. And then also conducts Agile ceremonies and all of that. That's basically what the Scrum Master does. So especially within an Agile space, there is really no, this person is the Oga or this person is the Madam, as the case may be. No, so everybody is treated equally or assumed to be on an equal pedestal, however, with different responsibilities. Things are done collectively, agreed by all, usually based on consensus. And then, of course, like I said, it is a self-managed team. So nobody can come and impose any decision on anybody. It has to be agreed upon, and then based on that, actions will now be done collectively. So because the outcome of an Agile project, of course, every project is usually a product or a service. So that's why when I'm talking about product here, I'm talking about the outcome itself, but then the steps are involved in achieving that particular outcome. That's now where project management comes in. So whether we're talking about Agile or we're talking about traditional methodology, the primary goal, of course, of focus is on the product itself. And that's why here, you have a lot of talks about, product as the case may be. Mr. Gerard, I hope, that answers your question. Mr. Charles, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's like Gerard already asked one of my questions. So that being the case, there's no point. I just wanted to ask if one can liken the Scrum Master to project that you have answered.
Okay.
But again, I was thinking the product owner relating it with stakeholders. So that means that may not be true too.
So the thing is, I want you guys to look at it from the perspective that these roles you have in the traditional management methodology, for example, the role of the project manager, and then of course stakeholders, is now shared amongst the Scrum team. So some of those responsibilities are being done by the Scrum Master, some of it are being done by the product owner, and then even some are even being done by the development team, as the case may be. So it's more like a shared responsibility now, other than a concentrated set of responsibilities, I mean, like we used to have within the traditional space. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, so please let me know if you can still see my screen. So I'm going to be talking about the Agile ceremonies now. So within the Agile project sorry, sometimes you can't talk and write at the same time, ceremonies. So within the Agile space, there are 4 major ceremonies. And the 4 major ceremonies you have within the Agile space are, we have what we call the daily Scrum. And then we have what we call the sprint planning. Then you have the sprint review. And then you have your retrospectives. So these are the 4 Agile ceremonies. Again, this is like a holy grail, especially for the exam. So first, remember I mentioned that in Agile, we carry out implementation based on what we refer to as sprints. And I use a 2-week sprint, in my own case. So we're running 2-week sprints effectively. So to begin every sprint, you begin every sprint with a sprint planning. So during the sprint planning, this is where you determine what are the items or user stories you would need to achieve within that particular sprint. And then how or what is the best way to go about it. And then also you now break it down into tasks. So who does what? So it is safe to say that during the sprint planning is where we determine how we are going to go about achieving the goal of the sprint. So when the sprint now eventually starts, every day we're going to be holding what we call a scrum or a daily scrum. So during the daily scrum, basically, we ask 3 major questions, which are, what did you do yesterday? What do you plan to do today? And then, are there any impediments? Those are the 3 key things that are discussed during the daily scrum. So the essence of the daily scrum is basically to help the team to be able to identify if there are impediments. And then, like I mentioned, the Scrum Master now works on removing those impediments. Then there's now the sprint review. So at the end of the sprint, we now need to do a demonstration to be able to showcase relevant stakeholders or anybody who is interested or who cares to know where we are, especially within the sprint itself. And that's what we refer to as the sprint review. So sprint review is where we do demonstration, showcasing what we have learned, and then also being able to explain essentially what has been accomplished within that particular sprint. And then there's now the retrospectives. And so retrospectives is now more like a lessons learned session for the team, where the team now goes back and reviews what they have done and also determines if there are ways they can make improvements in preparation for the next sprint. So remember, like I mentioned, during the retrospectives, 3 questions are asked. What did we get right? What are the things we did not get right? And then where can we make improvements? So those are the 3 questions that are usually asked and answered within the sprint retrospectives. So the sprint begins with a sprint planning, where we determine what and how to go about the sprint. And then when the sprint now starts, we begin to do our daily scrum, where we ask and answer 3 major questions. What did you do yesterday? What do you plan to do today? And then, are there any impediments? And then we also do the sprint review, where we now showcase what has been done at the end of the sprint. If you focus attention to what I said when I was starting this session, I said at the end of every sprint, we must have a working software or an increment. So during the sprint review, this is now where we showcase or do a demonstration of either the working software or the increment. That is the additional feature that's been added to that particular working software. Then take feedbacks, and then of course now do our retrospectives, where as a Scrum team now we come together and we ask ourselves, what did we get right? What are the things we did not get right that we may need to stop doing? And then if we had the chance to do that sprint again, what improvements can we make? Those are the things that actually we do within the retrospectives. So remember, I started talking about this first by saying that we're going to be focusing on 3 key aspects of Agile. One, the Agile artifacts, where I talked about the product backlog, I talked about information radiators, I talked about the sprint itself. Then also the roles that you have in the Agile space, which are the product owner, the Scrum Master, and then of course the development team, which of course I mentioned the Scrum Guide refers to our developers now. And then I also talked about the 4 ceremonies that you have within the Agile space, which are your daily Scrum, your sprint planning, your sprint review, and then of course your retrospectives. All right, so this is supposed to be a 1-hour session, and then I've tried as much as possible to see how I can keep it within that particular time limit. And then obviously, I've given you an overview of what an Agile project management is all about. So I want to know if anybody has any questions or any clarifications to make before we wrap up this particular session. I'm going to be sending the video recording. Some of us are already asking about it. I'm going to be sending it to everybody who took part in this very presentation. So I'll send you the video recordings for your own consumption. So please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here. Yes, Imo, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. If we have to take PMBOK 7.0, what's the best time to register for the exam?
So PMI says that PMBOK 7 testing has not yet started. So, I mean, if you're looking at taking a test based on PMBOK 7, you may need to wait until an advice is given on that. So, I mean, basically testing according to PMI's official publication is still based on PMBOK 6. And of course, testing is usually available every day. So, I mean, you can choose to register for the exam at any point in time.
Okay, if I decide to take 6 at this time, and if to upgrade to 7, what are the steps, the processes that are involved?
So there might necessarily not need to be like an upgrade thing. I mean, for example, I did my own certification as far back as 2013. So, but that was when we had like PMBOK 3. So, but the thing there is, there's now what we call PDUs, professional development units. So once you get certified, you need to be reporting 20 PDUs on an annual basis. So those 20 PDUs are now ways you update yourself based on current happenings within the project management space. So that's now where you can catch up on recent developments. And then, of course, you report it. And that's one of the key things that PMI uses to make sure that, you know, those who got certified stay updated. And then, of course, if I'm to use your own term, they remain upgraded, especially with regards to new developments in the PMP. So basically, once you get certified, all you simply need to do subsequently is take note of new developments, read about them, take new courses and new lectures, and then, of course, report them as your professional development units.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Is there any other question before we wrap this up? All right, so thank you all guys for your time. Mr. Charles, okay, want to quickly say something?
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your time once again on behalf of every one of us. And to say personally, this is end of February. I'm looking at March. Do I have the privilege of walking into the office for whatever consultation, even as I prepare?
I mean, you're an alumnus, so you can always come into your alma mater. So we're always open, and at any point in time, you can also call or chat me up on WhatsApp. We're always available.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll do that. So that I'll begin to start the process of registration as well.
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate you, sir.
Yes,
yes, sir.
The rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.